The date was November 3rd, 1984. I was 17 years old, and I had already decided that night would be my last. The note was written earlier that evening, before my shift started, tucked away in my room where someone would eventually find it. It explained everything. Why I couldn't do this anymore, why living hurt too much, why dying seemed like the only way out. I need you to understand something about my life before that night. I wasn't some carefree teenager worried about prom dates or college applications. My childhood had been stolen from me, piece by piece, year after year. When I was 14, my grandmother took me in after my mother couldn't care for me anymore. I thought maybe things would get better. They didn't. My grandmother's boyfriend made sure of that. For 3 years, I endured abuse in that house. Abuse I couldn't escape. Abuse that ate away at me until there was almost nothing left. I felt like a nobody, a thing, not even human anymore. And that night, November 3rd, after my double shift at the Krispy Kreme donut shop ended around 2 in the morning, I had planned to go home and end it all. My shift ended around 2 in the morning. The Tampa streets were empty, dark, quiet. I climbed onto my bicycle and started pedaling the route I always took home, the same route every single night. But that night felt different somehow. The darkness seemed heavier. The oak trees lining the road cast shadows that felt alive, watching, waiting. A car passed me and honked its horn. I remember thinking that was odd. Why would someone honk at me? I was on the sidewalk, not bothering anyone. I kept pedaling. The sound of the car faded behind me. I thought it had driven on, but when I passed by a church parking lot, I heard something behind me. Before I could even turn around to look, someone grabbed me. The force was so sudden, so violent, that I didn't even have time to scream before I hit the pavement. It felt like multiple people had yanked me off that bicycle, but it was one man, one incredibly strong man who dragged me across the street like I weighed nothing. I tried to scream then. I opened my mouth and let out everything I had. But then I felt it. Cold steel pressed against my left temple. A gun. "Shut up, or I'll blow your brains out." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was telling me the time or commenting on the weather. That's what terrified me most. Not the gun, not the violence, but the casual way he said it, like killing me meant nothing to him. He dragged me to his car, a Dodge Magnum, though I didn't know that then. He forced me inside and immediately blindfolded me. In those first moments, all I could think was that this wasn't how I wanted to die. I had a plan. I had a note. I was supposed to do this on my own terms. But now this stranger was going to kill me instead, and nobody would even find my note. Nobody would understand why I'd given up. And then something changed. Something clicked in my mind. Maybe it was the survival instinct kicking in. Maybe it was some deep part of me that wasn't ready to die after all. But I remember thinking, I'm not going to let him decide when I die. If I'm going to die, it's going to be my choice, not his. He drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. The blindfold was tight, but I forced myself to pay attention to everything else. The turns we made, the sounds of the road beneath the tires, the smell of his car. When I clenched my jaw, the blindfold would get tighter, but when I relaxed it, there was a tiny gap at the bottom. Through that gap, I caught glimpses, the word Magnum on the dashboard, the color of the interior, small details that might not matter if I didn't survive, but might mean everything if I did. He took me to his apartment. I could tell from the sound of our footsteps that we were climbing stairs. He opened a door and pushed me inside. That's when the smell hit me, a strange, musty odor that I couldn't quite place. Later, I would learn it was the smell of death, the scent of decomposition that had seeped into the walls and furniture of his apartment. But in that moment, I just knew something was very, very wrong. He untied the blindfold temporarily, just long enough to force me to look at him while he undressed me. Then he put it back on, tighter this time. What happened next lasted for 26 hours. 26 hours that felt like 26 lifetimes. He raped me so many times I lost count. Between assaults, he would talk to me. Sometimes his voice was almost gentle, like we were having a normal conversation. Other times it turned cold and threatening.
I decided to play a game with him. A psychological game that might be my only chance at survival. I started treating him like he was a child who needed comforting. I told him I understood him. I told him nobody else would understand, but I did. I offered to be his secret girlfriend. I told him we could see each other whenever he wanted, that I wouldn't tell anyone, that we could have something special. He seemed to respond to this. His voice would soften when I talked like that. So I kept going. I made up a story about having a sick father who depended on me, who would die without me to take care of him. I painted myself as the only child of an ill parent, someone who would be missed, someone whose disappearance would matter. It was all lies, but I sold those lies like my life depended on them, because it did. During those 26 hours, I did something else, too. Every time he left me alone, even for a minute, I touched everything I could. I ran my fingers along surfaces, pressed my hands against walls, grabbed objects. I was leaving fingerprints everywhere. If he killed me, if my body was found, maybe those prints would lead police back to this apartment. Maybe my death could at least stop him from killing someone else. At one point, I heard the television turn on in another room. The news was playing, and I heard my name. I was being reported as missing. My grandmother had called it in when I didn't come home. Hearing that almost broke me. I had to fight back tears, fight back the scream that wanted to escape my throat. Because if he heard me react, if he knew I heard that broadcast, he might realize I could identify his apartment, his voice, his patterns. He might decide to kill me right then, rather than risk it. But then something happened that made my blood run cold. During one of his trips to the bathroom, I heard a sound that changed everything. It was mechanical, electronic, the sound of an ATM machine. He was using an ATM inside his apartment building, which meant there would be a record, a timestamp, a location, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that he was going to kill me. He had to. Because I had heard too much, seen too much, knew too much. There was no way he could let me live.
The psychological tactics I'd been using suddenly felt desperate, hopeless. But I kept going, because what else could I do? I doubled down on the sick father story. I begged him to let me go, promising I would come back, promising I wouldn't tell anyone. I made my voice shake. I cried. I made myself as pathetic and non-threatening as possible. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. After 26 hours, he told me he was going to take me home. I didn't believe him at first. I thought this was it, that he was taking me somewhere remote to kill me where nobody would hear my screams. But he drove me back to the area where he'd taken me and stopped the car near my grandmother's house. He kept the blindfold on me, but opened the door. "Count to 5 before you take the blindfold off," he said. "If you take it off before then, I'll kill you." I sat there in the dark behind that blindfold and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I ripped it off and ran. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, expecting to hear gunshots, expecting to feel a bullet tear through my back. But nothing happened. He was gone. When I got inside my grandmother's house, I was immediately met with anger. Her boyfriend, my abuser, demanded to know where I'd been. He didn't believe my story at first. He interrogated me for 5 hours, accusing me of lying, of making it up, of being out with boys.
But my story never changed because it was true. Every horrible detail was true. Finally, they called the police. The police interview was almost as traumatic as the abduction itself. I could tell from their faces that they were skeptical. A teenage girl with a history of abuse claiming she was kidnapped and raped but then released? It sounded too convenient, too much like a story someone would make up. But I gave them every detail I could remember: the red Dodge Magnum, the word I'd seen on the dashboard, the approximate time I'd heard the ATM, the layout of the apartment, the smell, everything. A few days later, I was watching the news at my grandmother's house when I saw it. Another body had been found, another young woman murdered, dumped like garbage. And I knew in my gut it was him, the man who had held me captive, the man who had raped me, the man who had let me go for reasons I still don't fully understand. I called the detective handling my case immediately.
That's when everything started moving fast. Police set up surveillance based on my description and the details I'd provided. They cross-referenced owners of red Dodge Magnums with people who had made ATM transactions at that specific location at that specific time, and they found him. Bobby Joe Long. A man with a wife and a job and a normal-looking life. A man who was also one of the most prolific serial killers in Florida's history. They arrested him on November 16, 1984, just 12 days after he'd released me. When they searched his apartment, the apartment I'd memorized through touch and sound and those tiny glimpses beneath the blindfold, they found evidence of unimaginable horror. Red carpet fibers that matched fibers found on the bodies of his victims. Weapons, photographs. The truth came spilling out. He confessed to killing 8 women. Later, investigators connected him to 2 more murders that happened after he released me. 10 victims in total, though many believe there were more. The victims were mostly sex workers and dancers, women he thought nobody would miss, women whose disappearances might not make the news. 20-year-old Artis Wick, 19-year-old Lana Long, 22-year-old Michelle Sims, Elizabeth Loudenbach, Vicki Elliott, Chanel Williams, Karen Dinsfriend, Kimberly Hops, Virginia Johnson, Kim Swan. He had bound them, strangled them, positioned their bodies in degrading poses. He had treated them like they were nothing. But they were everything to someone. Daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. Each one had a life, had dreams, had people who loved them, and each one died at the hands of a man who saw them as objects to be used and discarded. The trial was grueling. I had to testify. I had to sit there and describe in detail what he'd done to me, while he sat just feet away, staring at me with those same cold eyes. But I did it. I told my story. I helped put him away. Bobby Joe Long was convicted and sentenced to death. 28 life sentences plus the death penalty. He sat on death row for 34 years, filing appeal after appeal, prolonging the inevitable. During that time, I rebuilt my life. I aged out of the foster care system where they'd placed me after I reported my grandmother's boyfriend for sexual abuse. I moved in with a caring aunt and uncle. I got a job. I started healing, slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless.
In 1999, I joined the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, the same agency that had caught my abductor. I specialized in sex crimes and protecting children. I became a school resource officer. I turned my nightmare into purpose. I became someone who could help other victims, who could look them in the eye and say, "I understand. I survived, and you can too." On May 23, 2019, I sat in the front row of the viewing room at Florida State Prison. I wore a T-shirt I'd been planning for years. On the front, it said "Long." On the back, "Overdue." Long overdue. I watched as they administered the lethal injection.
I watched Bobby Joe Long take his last breath. People asked me afterward if it brought closure, if seeing him die made everything better. The truth is, I don't know. Some nights I still wake up feeling a cold steel of that gun against my temple. Some nights I still hear his voice. Some nights I'm back in that apartment, blindfolded, terrified, counting the seconds until I die. The trauma doesn't just go away because the person who caused it is dead. But I'm not a victim anymore. I'm a survivor. I'm a warrior. I turned the worst night of my life into a life spent protecting others from monsters like him. And maybe that's not closure, but it's something. It's purpose. It's proof that he didn't win, that I'm still here, still fighting, still alive. And that has to be enough.
It was July 22nd, 1991, and Milwaukee was sweltering in the summer heat. I was 32 years old, hanging out with some friends at the Grand Avenue Mall, just trying to enjoy the evening. We were drinking, laughing, talking about nothing important. Life was normal that night, regular, safe. Then he approached us. He was a white guy, average height, kind of quiet, but friendly enough. He introduced himself and started chatting with us. He seemed normal. That's what I remember most clearly, how absolutely normal he seemed. He told us he was from Chicago, that he was in town visiting his sick grandmother. He talked about the military, and my ears perked up at that, because my father had served. We had that in common, or so I thought. Everything about him suggested he was just a regular guy looking to pass the time with some company. After we'd been talking for a while, he made an offer. He said he had beer at his apartment and invited us to come over. He wanted to watch a movie, The Exorcist, and he'd pay us to take some photographs. Nothing weird, he said, just some modeling shots. He offered $100. To a guy like me who didn't have much money, that sounded pretty good. My friends weren't interested, but I figured why not? A few beers, a movie, make some easy cash. What could go wrong? Everything could go wrong. The walk to his apartment should have been my first warning. The neighborhood got progressively worse the farther we walked. The Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street weren't in the nicest area of Milwaukee, but I'd been in worse places. When we climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, number 213, and he unlocked the door, I noticed a strange smell. It was subtle at first, but it was there. Musty, rotten, wrong. When I mentioned it, he waved it off casually, saying his building management company was supposed to take care of it. I should have left then. That smell alone should have sent me running. But he was so casual about it, so unconcerned, that I talked myself out of my instincts. I pushed down the little voice in my head screaming that something wasn't right. The apartment was dim, cluttered. There was an aquarium with tropical fish against one wall, their colors bright against the gloom. I walked over to look at them, trying to ignore that smell that seemed to be getting stronger. That's when everything changed.
I heard a metallic click behind me. Before I could turn around, I felt cold steel snap around my left wrist. Handcuffs. He had handcuffed me. I spun around, and the man I'd been casually drinking with was gone. In his place was something else. His eyes had changed. His whole demeanor had changed. He was holding a large butcher knife. "Don't move," he said quietly. "Don't make me use this." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode from my chest. I tried to stay calm, tried to think. He had one of my wrists cuffed, but not the other one yet. If I could keep it that way, maybe I had a chance. I started talking to him, trying to sound non-threatening, trying to appeal to whatever humanity might still exist in him. "Hey man, it's okay," I said. "Whatever this is, we can talk about it. Just tell me what you want." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he guided me, knife still in hand, toward the bedroom. That smell was overwhelming now. It filled my nose, my throat, made me want to gag.
But I kept talking, kept trying to connect with him. I offered to pose for whatever photos he wanted. I told him I wouldn't try to run away. I promised I'd cooperate. Whatever he needed, I'd do it. Just don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. He seemed to calm down a little at that. He gestured for me to sit on the bed, and I did. The knife was still in his hand, but he wasn't actively threatening me with it anymore. He suggested we watch the movie he'd mentioned, The Exorcist, said it would help us both relax. I agreed immediately. Anything to buy time, anything to keep that knife away from my throat. So we sat there in his bedroom watching this horror movie, and the whole situation felt surreal, nightmarish. Here I was, handcuffed, trapped with a man holding a knife, watching a movie about demonic possession. The irony wasn't lost on me. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to gauge his mood, trying to figure out when and if I'd have a chance to escape. Then he did something that made my blood freeze. He moved closer to me on the bed. He laid his head on my chest, right over my heart. I could feel him listening to it beat. And while he was lying there, he started chanting along with the movie. The Latin phrases from The Exorcist, he was reciting them like a prayer, like a ritual.
Then he said it, the words that made me realize I was going to die in that apartment. I'm going to have to eat your heart. His voice was soft, almost gentle when he said it. That made it worse somehow. He wasn't angry or excited. He was just stating a fact, like he was telling me what he'd planned to have for dinner, and I was on the menu. My mind went blank with terror. This wasn't just about robbery or assault. This was something far worse, something I couldn't fully comprehend even as it was happening. I had to get out. I had to escape. But how? I was handcuffed, he had a knife, the door was across the room, and even if I made it there, I had no idea if it was locked or how many locks there were. I forced myself to keep talking, to keep him engaged. I complimented him. I sympathized with him. I acted like we were friends, like this was all just a misunderstanding. For 4 hours I negotiated for my life. 4 hours of telling him whatever I thought he wanted to hear, of watching his moods shift, of seeing him vacillate between this friendly, talkative guy and something darker, something predatory. At some point, he got tired. He told me he needed to rest. He was going to lie down, but I should stay put. Don't try anything, he said. The knife was within his reach. The handcuffs were still on my wrist. I nodded, agreed, promised I wouldn't move. But I was watching, waiting, looking for any opportunity. And it came. He dozed off, just for a moment, just long enough. The hand that had been holding the handcuff key loosened. I saw my chance. I punched him as hard as I could. The blow landed on his face, stunning him. Before he could recover, I was up and running. The handcuffs were still on one wrist, dangling, banging against my arm as I ran. I hit the door, praying it would open, and it did. I flew down those stairs faster than I've ever moved in my life, the handcuffs clanging against the railing, my lungs burning, my heart threatening to burst. When I hit the street, I saw the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, a Milwaukee police car. I ran toward it, waving my arms, the handcuffs glinting in the streetlights. The officers stopped. They saw me, shirtless, handcuffed, terrified, and they got out of the car.
"He tried to kill me," I gasped. "He's got knives. He's got handcuffs. He was going to kill me." The officers looked at each other, then at me. One of them, Officer Routh, asked where this happened. I pointed back toward the Oxford apartments, toward apartment 213. They asked if I'd go back with them to retrieve the handcuff key. I didn't want to go back there. God, I didn't want to go back. But I needed these handcuffs off. I needed evidence. I needed them to see what I'd seen, smell what I'd smelled, understand the danger I'd been in. So I led them back. We climbed those stairs again, knocked on the door of apartment 213, and when he opened it, when Jeffrey Dahmer opened that door, he was calm, polite. He apologized for the misunderstanding and offered to get the handcuff keys. He let the officers inside. That's when Officer Mueller saw it.
He was looking around the apartment, taking in the scene, when his eyes landed on an open drawer. Inside were Polaroid photographs, and those photographs showed things that no person should ever have to see. Bodies in various stages of dismemberment, men in poses that made it clear they were dead when the photos were taken, gruesome, horrific evidence of unthinkable crimes. "Get him out of here," Mueller said to Routh, gesturing at Dahmer. The friendly mask Dahmer had been wearing cracked. He tried to fight back, tried to resist, but the officers subdued him. And then they started searching the apartment in earnest. What they found will haunt me for the rest of my life. A severed head in the refrigerator, 2 more heads in the freezer, photographs of bodies in various stages of decay and dismemberment, jars containing preserved genitalia, an entire gallery of horror documented in Polaroids. The smell I'd noticed wasn't from poor building maintenance. It was death. It was the stench of 17 murdered men whose remains had been stored, kept, preserved in that apartment like trophies. Jeffrey Dahmer confessed to everything. 17 murders spanning 13 years. He told police how he'd lure men back to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol, how he'd drug their drinks, how he'd strangle or stab them while they were unconscious, how he'd have sex with their corpses, how he'd dismember them and keep parts as souvenirs, how he'd even tried to create zombies by drilling holes in living victims' skulls and pouring acid inside.
I was supposed to be victim number 18. The media hailed me as a hero, the man who stopped Jeffrey Dahmer, the one who escaped and led police right to the Milwaukee cannibal. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like I was drowning. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that apartment. Every time I smelled something even remotely off, I was transported back to that smell of death. Every time someone touched me unexpectedly, I was feeling those handcuffs snap around my wrist again. I testified at his trial, sat there on the witness stand and recounted every detail of those 4 hours. Dahmer sat there listening, representing himself, which meant he got to cross-examine me. I had to look into those same eyes that had watched me in that apartment, had to answer his questions, had to relive it all over again in front of cameras and reporters at a packed courtroom. He was convicted and sentenced to 957 years in prison, 15 consecutive life sentences. 2 years later, another inmate killed him, beat him to death with a metal bar from the prison gym. Some people said he got what he deserved. Maybe he did, but his death didn't make my nightmares stop. My life fell apart after that. The publicity from the case brought attention I didn't want, attention that included law enforcement from my hometown of Tupelo, Mississippi, where I had outstanding warrants. I was extradited, charged, convicted. When I came back to Milwaukee, I couldn't hold down a job, couldn't keep a place to live. The trauma was too much, too overwhelming. I turned to alcohol, to drugs, anything to make the memories stop, anything to silence the voice in my head that kept repeating those words, "I'm going to have to eat your heart." People started calling me for interviews, wanting me to relive that night over and over. Some wanted me to be part of a lawsuit against the police department for not catching Dahmer sooner. There had been so many warning signs, so many calls from neighbors about the smell, about screams, about strange behavior. If they'd acted sooner, 17 men might still be alive, and I might not have spent 4 hours handcuffed to a madman. But I couldn't do the lawsuit. Couldn't handle being in courtrooms again, being in the spotlight again. I just wanted to disappear, to forget, to be anyone else living any other life.
I became homeless, spent years on the streets, sleeping in shelters when I could find room, sleeping outside when I couldn't. Got arrested more times than I can count for petty crimes, for drug possession, for things I did just to survive another day. In 2011, I was charged with throwing a man off a bridge. I ended up serving time for aiding a felon. More years in prison. More years of my life gone. My attorney, Paul Ksachinsky, said it best. My life was like Humpty Dumpty. It shattered that night in July 1991, and I was never able to put the pieces back together again. The man I was before I walked into apartment 123 died there. The man who walked out was someone else entirely, someone broken, someone haunted. I called Dahmer the devil, because how else do you describe what he was, what he did? I never sought treatment for what happened, never went to therapy or talked to a professional about the trauma, because talking about it meant remembering it, and remembering it meant being back there, feeling his head on my chest, hearing him chant, seeing those photographs, smelling that smell of death that's never quite left my nostrils. I self-medicated instead. Alcohol, drugs, whatever would make me forget, even if just for a little while. Whatever would let me sleep without dreaming of that apartment, that man, those 4 hours that destroyed my entire life. People ask where I am now, what happened to Tracy Edwards. The truth is, I disappeared. After I got out of prison, I vanished into the streets, into obscurity. I don't want to be found. I don't want to tell my story anymore. I've told it enough. I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who survived something unsurvivable and spent the rest of his life trying to process what that survival cost him. Some people say I saved lives by leading police to Dahmer. Maybe I did, but I couldn't save myself. And that's what I think about every single day. That I walked out of that apartment alive, but part of me, the most important part, died there anyway. And Jeffrey Dahmer won, after all.
Anchorage, Alaska, June 13th, 1983. I was 17 years old, working the streets, trying to survive the only way I knew how. Life hadn't been kind to me. I won't pretend it had. I was young, I was struggling, and I was doing what I had to do to get by. And on that evening, necessity led me to accept a proposition from a man in a car. He was short, soft-spoken, unremarkable looking, the kind of man you'd pass on the street and immediately forget. He offered me $200. $200 was good money, money I needed, so I got into his car. The moment the door closed, everything changed. He pulled out a gun, a .357 Magnum, and pointed it directly at my head. Before I could scream, before I could even process what was happening, he snapped handcuffs around my wrists. That click of metal on metal might be the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. "Don't move," he said quietly, "or I'll kill you." I believed him. Every instinct in my body told me this man had done this before, that I wasn't his first victim.
He drove me through Anchorage to his house in the Muldoon neighborhood. He pulled into the garage and the door closed behind us with a grinding sound that felt like the closing of a tomb. He forced me inside, the gun pressed against my back, the handcuffs cutting into my wrists. The house looked normal from what I could see. Neat, organized. There were photographs on the walls, family pictures. But there was something in the air, a feeling of wrongness that I couldn't quite name. He took me to the basement. The handcuffs stayed on, but he added more restraints. He tied a rope around my neck and connected it to a coffee table. Then he raped me. And when he was done, he took a nap on a nearby couch like nothing had happened, like I was nothing. I sat there, tied up, trying not to panic, trying to think. Hours passed. He woke up and raped me again. Then he started showing me things, trophies, hunting trophies, mounted animal heads, plaques with his name on them for winning various hunting competitions. And that's when I saw it.
his real name on one of those plaques, not the fake name he'd given me. Robert Hansen. And in that moment, I understood everything. He had shown me his real name because he didn't plan to let me live alive. Dead girls don't tell tales. All those hunting trophies on the walls, the bears, the moose, the deer, they weren't just about animals. They were about the hunt itself, the thrill of tracking prey, the satisfaction of the kill. And I was his prey now. He told me we were going for a ride, that he wanted to take me somewhere special. He made it sound almost romantic, but I knew better. Wherever he was taking me, I wasn't coming back from it. He loaded me into his car and drove to Merrill Field, a small airport on the outskirts of Anchorage. And when I saw his plane sitting there on the tarmac, my blood ran cold. This was how he did it. He flew his victims to remote locations where no one would hear them scream, where no one would find their bodies. The wilderness of Alaska is vast, unforgiving. A person could disappear out there and never be found.
He parked and got out, telling me to stay put or he'd kill me right there. Then he walked toward his plane to do a pre-flight check. This was it, my only chance. If I got on that plane, I was dead. There was no doubt in my mind about that. My hands were still cuffed in front of me. I had no shoes. He'd taken them earlier, though I'd deliberately left them in his car as evidence. But none of that mattered. I threw my body weight toward the driver's side, used my cuffed hands to pull the door handle, and the door opened. I fell out of the car and onto the tarmac. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, I heard him shout. I heard his footsteps, but I didn't look back. I ran toward the road, toward the lights of the nearest buildings, toward anything that might mean safety. My feet were bleeding, the handcuffs cut into my wrists with every pump of my arms, but I ran like I'd never run before. And in my head, and I know how this might sound, but I heard voices. Whether they were real or just my survival instinct giving me the push I needed, I'll never fully know. But in that moment, running across that tarmac, it felt like other voices were urging me forward. Voices that could have belonged to his other victims, the ones who didn't make it, all screaming the same thing. Run! Run! Those voices, real or imagined, pushed me forward when I thought I couldn't run anymore. I made it to the road and flagged down a passing truck. The driver, a man named Robert Yount, slammed on his brakes when he saw me. Barefoot, handcuffed, bleeding, crying. He could have driven away, but he stopped. He let me into his truck. I was hysterical. I couldn't get the words out at first, but finally I managed to tell him enough that a man had tried to kill me. Yount wanted to take me straight to the police station, but I was terrified. I had a record. I thought they wouldn't believe me, so I begged him to take me to the Mushian Motel instead. He did, though I could tell he didn't like it.
But Yount didn't just drop me off and forget about me. He went to the police. He reported what he'd seen, and that report started an investigation that would change everything. At the airfield, a security guard had noticed something suspicious too. A man loading equipment into a plane, acting nervous, looking around. The guard wrote down the license plate number. That number, combined with Yount's report, led police to Robert Hansen. At first, they didn't believe me. I had a troubled past. Hansen was a successful businessman, a baker who owned his own shop. He had a wife and 2 children. He seemed like a pillar of the community. When they brought him in for questioning, he denied everything, said I was trying to extort money from him. But I had left evidence, those sneakers in his car, and I had given them details that checked out. Slowly, the investigation built. Detective Glenn Floth of the Alaska State Troopers started putting together a profile with help from the FBI. 3 months after my escape, police got a warrant to search Hansen's property. What they found confirmed every nightmare. In Hansen's attic, hidden behind his bed's headboard, was an aeronautical chart. On that chart were X marks, 37 of them. Each mark, investigators came to understand,
could indicate where he'd taken victims. Many corresponded to where bodies had already been found. Others pointed to locations where remains would be discovered later. They also found jewelry belonging to victims, a trophy collection, and weapons, including the rifle he'd used to hunt women after flying them to remote locations and releasing them like animals. When confronted with the evidence, Hansen finally confessed. He admitted to killing at least 17 women over 12 years, though many believe there were more. The victims were mostly sex workers and dancers, women he thought society wouldn't miss. But they all had names, identities, lives that were stolen from them. Some are known: 19-year-old Celia Van Zanten, 20-year-old Artis Ann Wick, 30-year-old Paula Goulding, 21-year-old Sherry Morrow, 24-year-old Joanna Messina. Others were known only as Eklutna Annie or Horseshoe Harriet because their identities weren't discovered until years later, if at all. Robert Hansen pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 461 years in prison, plus life without the possibility of parole. He died on August 21, 2014, at the age of 75, still in prison. The day he died, I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, no closure. Because for every victim whose family got answers, there were others who didn't. Those X marks on his map that didn't correspond to known victims. Women who were still out there, somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, waiting to be found. I survived, but my life was never the same. I struggled with addiction, with trauma, with the weight of being the one who got away. It took years before I could begin to build something resembling a normal life, away from those streets, away from those memories. The director who made the movie about my story, The Frozen Ground, tracked me down decades later. I agreed to tell my story one more time because I wanted people to understand something important. Those women Hansen killed, the ones society wrote off as just prostitutes, were just dancers. They were human beings. They had families. They had dreams. They mattered. Among those of us who worked the streets, we had warning systems. Word would spread about dangerous men. We tried to protect each other the best we could, but it wasn't enough when society had decided our lives weren't worth as much as someone else's.
I think about those voices I heard sometimes, whether they were real or just my mind's way of giving me strength. I think about all the women who didn't escape, who are still out there in that wilderness. Some of those X marks on Hansen's map led to nothing. Either he lied about where he'd left them, or the wilderness had reclaimed them so completely that even trained search teams couldn't find them. I'm older now, living a quiet life far from Alaska. I have a family who knows my story. But every June 13th, I remember. I remember the feeling of those handcuffs. I remember the rope around my neck. I remember seeing my death in his eyes. I remember running across that tarmac with bloody feet and whatever strength I could find, whether it came from within me or from something beyond me. And I remember that I'm still here, that 17 other women aren't. I carry them with me, all of them, the ones who were found and the ones who weren't, the ones who have names and the ones who don't. Every day I'm alive is a day they're not. And I don't know what to do with that except keep living, keep surviving, keep being a voice for women whose voices were silenced forever. That's how I escaped a serial killer, but I'm not sure I really escaped at all. Because part of me is still in that basement, still on that tarmac, still hearing those voices, and part of me always will be. If this deep dive into these harrowing true stories resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Leave a comment below telling me what you thought, or if you have suggestions for future cases you'd like me to cover. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these important stories to light. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. Trust your instincts. Because the most terrifying thing about these stories isn't that they happened, it's that they could happen to anyone.
that evil doesn't denounce itself, that danger doesn't always look dangerous. The 3 people whose stories I've shared tonight survived because they refused to give up, even when giving up seemed like the only option left. They're still here, still fighting their own private battles with the memories, still carrying the weight of experiences no one should have to carry. But they're still here, and sometimes that's enough. Until next time.